Hello, I'm Andy King, technical editor of Good Woodworking magazine, and today we're going to do a little bit of work on basic workshop rotation with your machinery. Okay, so now we're on the bandsaw now. Two thoughts here. Basically, obviously you set it up and you work and you just do your shoulder lines, flip over, do the same, and adjust accordingly. Put it back and forward to the right side of the line you've got to do. You can, if you're in a situation where you do a lot of this sort of work, make yourself a gauge block which corresponds to the thickness of your tenon plus the blade itself, and then move it backwards and forwards. Just get it in one position so that basically once you're in, you do your cut, put your block in, and it moves it over enough to give you the tenon line. It's something we can go into a later date on that one. It's just a little tip. The other thing as well, which again comes into the rod situation. Now, although I've always said, I prefer to do it that way where I keep extra timber on for horns and stuff like that. On frames especially, I'd still prefer to do that. Certainly with certain things, you can actually make things to component sizes, but you still allow for the snipe. So what you can do is go to your table saw and cut down to the dimensions do you need after. That's not a problem because everything's established still off the rod. You can still do that and cut right down to component sizes. In that situation, when you cut your tenons, you can actually do it so that rather than have to cut to your lines, you can actually put a little block at the back, clamp it on, push it through, and you know you're going to hit that same shoulder line all the time. It's just a little speeded up job. It's just like having a little jig, I suppose. Do that again, but you're working off. You've got to make sure that everything is equal off of these two ends when you do your initial setting up off of your rod. It's just a little bit more of a sort of time saver, I suppose, in one respect. It's 6 of one again, half a dozen the other, where if you let your tenons stick through, just got to trim them off and plane them up. It's horses for courses, really. I prefer to do it this way on externally, or certainly on joinery type stuff. When it comes to the wedging especially, which I'll explain once we get through this side of things. So I'll just cut this one off now. When you flip it, obviously, up to that same line. Then adjust. As I say, if you had a gauge block, and obviously your fence will be back here to start with, you'd have cut this line first, put your gauge block in, then cut that one. This is where a fine adjustment on a bandsaw fence does help. Okay, that looks good. So just stop into your line. As you can see, again, your step cut is in there. So basically you do it on all your joints. With the actual door itself, obviously, that one will be both in line because you're just going into what is essentially the tongue part of it, into the frame itself or into the door framework. So once you've done all that, it's basically just cut these off, check the joints for fit, which we'll do next. So we need to remove the actual cheeks of the tenons now and just check the joints for fit. Obviously in an ideal world I'll be on a bench, not just stuck on a bit of MDF on a saw table. And if you've got a chop saw that you can do trenching work with, and it's a lot quicker than doing it this way, but the manual tools are coming out every now and again. You've got to get a nosebleed every now and again, but you've got to do it. So basically, you know, the old favourite, just flip over. And of course, you'd knife your lines, give them the choice, but we're going to have to make do with council house stuff at the moment, I'm afraid. So you can see the actual step, as I was saying all along, which determines the rebate. So in theory, that should just drop into there. If I've done the mortise the right size, which looks a little bit snug, it might be okay. Just drop that on the floor and give it a bit of a push. Yep. Yep, and there you go. So joints up tight when that's clamped up and everything's nice and flush. So obviously do that the same doors, as same as the frame. And in theory, you can drop it back onto your rod and you should see it all should all line up, which we'll do next once I've established all these joints. So we'll move on to that as the next stage. Okay, so joints are cut, everything is in. Right, what we need to do is obviously just to prove it works. This is the rod. So here's the width of the door. That's allowing for the clearance there. It lines up on the clearance line there. Height-wise, you can do the same again. You can drop it on, and you can see your clearance line is there. Drop it on there, and it hits your clearance line there. The same with the frame. Again, you've got your determining points. Overall height is there. It lines up. Overall width is there to there. It lines up. So everything works. And in theory then, what you'll find is the door will actually drop into the opening when it's cleaned it up, and obviously drop into the opening that way when it's cleaned up as well. Now, one thing I'd like to touch upon is wedging. Now, furniture and joinery are slightly different in the way things are wedged. The same principle applies. You still obviously need to make relief for the wedge. So you drop in what would be, I'll find my pencil. You would still work again, 2/3, 1/3 is the old favourite. So you'd still drop in what would be your shoulder line there. You'll come 2/3 down and drop in like a wedge line there and a wedge line there. But the difference being is you tend to find in furniture work, what you do is put a kerf line here and here, about sort of 6 mm. Drop that down to the distance you need, again about 2/3 down. You drive the wedge in, and what it does, it forces this over. So you end up, it's nice for decorative work. You can put in obviously different colour timbers, that sort of stuff. But for joinery work, the traditional way of doing it is this way, where the wedges are on the outside face. Now the reason behind that is, what you're looking to achieve is losing the cramps this way, just cramp these ways, just do it that way, and when you knock your wedges in, you've got your outer wedges there, your inner ones there, all the way around, all glued up, ready to go. Glue your wedges as well. And what you're doing is you just give this one a light tap, just to fill up the gap, and then you drive this one, and what it does is it pushes against the joint there, and it pushes right tight against your shoulder line. Now if your chisel cutting is accurate on your mortises, which it should be, it will mean that that determines that point and that point. Your two chisel lines will actually come up smack on both sides. So by driving the outer wedges in first, it drives those rails into exactly in the right position where they should be. And it also then, it compresses the tenon, compresses the wedges. What you can find with putting in this design, where you put a kerf line in, not so much on a wider rail, but if you've got narrower stuff, you work on stuff like that, it can be that you can drive it in a little bit too deep, and it can come right the way through and split the actual rail itself. So this is the way that you tend to be taught, certainly at joinery level. And for me, unless I'm doing decorative stuff, I'll still probably use this way if I was doing it for actual furniture type stuff. It doesn't really make a lot of odds. All you're looking to do is secure the joint more than anything. If the joint's not really going to be seen as such, not for decoration, then it works a treat. And invariably, if you're not going to be using it for decoration anyway, you could get away with a stub tenon on furniture because it's not taking the brunt of the sort of stresses and strains of day-to-day sort of work that joinery does. So the basic principle is, though, you're working off of a rod. This is what this is trying to set out, is the way a rod works, the way you actually use a rod to your advantage, where you just work off basically two dimensions, your overall size, and that's it. You dimension your timber accordingly off of a cutting list, and you work from that point. All that remains for this now is to have the panel made. And again, no need to measure. I don't need to know that distance there. It's all there on the rod. I know exactly what I need to do. All I need to look at is I've got my overall position here of my tongues, or my groove should I say. I've got those marked in. All I need to do is leave myself a little bit of clearance to fit those in. Now what I could do is obviously get a piece of board or whatever, and unfortunately I've got to use my piece of MDF what I've marked up on. But what I can do now is I can measure this if I want to, because I can measure off of those 2 points and cut it, or I can just basically find a piece of MDF that is roughly the right size I need, drop it on and just mark up the piece I need to cut off, and away I go. And then onto the spindle moulder with the actual panel raiser in, done and in. And then I can do a final glue up and away you go, and you're just ready to go then, and it's as simple as that. Okay, so there we go, panel is in. As with everything, it's always good to do a nice dry fit first to make sure everything works as you want it to. As I say, you know, we know everything fits because we've already checked that off of the rod. We've checked it against itself to make sure it all works properly. So I know for one now that I can actually glue this up, obviously sand it all up properly, fit the door, and we're ready to go. So it's just a very, very simple way of ensuring accuracy at all times. The rod is fantastic. Marking out, you know, it's the basics of, and it's something we should all be looking to do, I think, more than anything. Facing edge marks, obviously, accurate marking out, accurate machining. As I say, my method is slightly different to others, the way I do actually my marking out off of pre-machined timber, but it works for me, and it always ensures that what I mark from remains accurate. So all your joints come up tight, pretty well straight off. There's no actual fiddling around needed. You can come off the rod, and if the rod's accurate and you mark from it accurately, then you end up with, in theory, accurate joinery, furniture making, whatever it is. Whatever you apply it to, it works. The principle remains the same. Generally, that's the end of it. So here we go. As I say, I'll get this sanded up now, glued up and ready to go, and that's the end of it. So that's it. Goodbye. Have fun.